This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
President now in Havana, Cuba, set to make an historic speech there. Of course, he's going to begin by addressing the terror attacks in Brussels. That is the scene right there in Havana, Cuba right now. I want to bring John Karl, our White House correspondent, back in on this right now, John. And this is the kind of thing the president always travels with his national security team, is always on duty. But this was not expected here. Waking up this morning to the news, 2 deadly terror attacks in Brussels, 31 dead, 187 wounded. But you say the president, after he addresses the attacks this morning, is going to continue with the trip?
There's no indication that anything is changing on his schedule. This was to be an historic day, and is an historic day here in Cuba. The president here in Cuba, obviously the first president to visit since Calvin Coolidge, but also addressing the Cuban people on live television, something we haven't seen a U.S. president ever do. And now very much overshadowed by events in Brussels. The president will begin his speech by talking about the terrorist attack in Brussels. He was awakened early this morning, way before dawn, and briefed on this, has been briefed steadily throughout. Whenever the president travels, as you point out, he has his national security team, the full contingent ability to communicate. He's got his national security advisor here, his secretary of state. But the intention here is for him to continue on his schedule, a schedule, George, that includes this afternoon a baseball game here in Cuba, and there's no indication that any of that is being changed.
But right now, thank you, John, the president about to speak at that Grand Theater in Havana, Cuba. It comes in the wake of these terror attacks in Brussels, Belgium this morning. We're going to keep an eye on the screen right there as the president comes to the podium.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. Please. Thank you very much. To President Castro, the people of Cuba, thank you so much for the warm welcome that I have received, that my family have received, and that our delegation has received. It is an extraordinary honor to be here today. Before I begin, please indulge me. I want to comment on the terrorist attacks that have taken place in Brussels. The thoughts and the prayers of the American people are with the people of Belgium, and we stand in solidarity with them in condemning these outrageous attacks against innocent people. We will do whatever is necessary to support our friend and ally Belgium in bringing to justice those who are responsible. And this is yet another reminder that the world must unite. We must be together, regardless of nationality or race or faith, in fighting against the scourge of terrorism. We can and we will defeat those who threaten the safety and security of people all around the world. To the government and the people of Cuba, I want to thank you for the kindness that you've shown to me and Michelle, Malia, Sasha, my mother-in-law, Marion. Cultivo una rosa blanca. In his most famous poem, Jose Marti made this offering of friendship and peace to both his friend and his enemy. Today, as the President of the United States of America, I offer the Cuban people el saludo de paz.
There you see President Obama in Cuba speaking to the Cuban people, beginning his remarks, asking the Cuban people to indulge him for his remarks on those deadly terror attacks in Belgium this morning, saying the American people stand in solidarity with the people of Belgium, saying the United States is going to do whatever is necessary to help the Belgian authorities track down and get those responsible for these attacks today, and saying it's a reminder again that the world must unite against terror. I want to bring in Richard Clarke, former counterterrorism czar for several United States presidents as well. We're getting a better sense of exactly what happened in Belgium this morning. Richard Clarke, it looks like a suicide bomber at the airport, a separate attack in the metro, coordinated attacks, the timing about an hour apart, reminiscent of the terror attacks in Paris 4 months ago.
And probably planned by the same people who planned those attacks 4 months ago. And for the 4 months since the Paris attacks, French and Belgian police have been cooperating, trying to track down the cell and the logistic support network behind it in Brussels. But they've failed. A week ago today, they stormed an apartment thinking it was empty, thinking there might be bombs or other material in it. The police were shot on their way in. Then Friday of last week, they raided another apartment and found the ringleader of the Paris attacks from 4 months ago. After that second raid on Friday, they said they now have evidence that other attacks were being planned. That's what happened today, and that the support network was much bigger than they had been thinking for the last 4 months. George, there's no way around this. The Belgian police are going to be criticized for not being able to stop this attack when they knew for a very long time that the cell was out there planning attacks.
We've already seen some of that criticism. Secretary Clinton on the program earlier saying that this is a call for a reminder that we need some relaxed laws for how the Belgian authorities carry out their raids, saying there had been no nighttime raids, that perhaps that might have helped them get to the bottom of this. I want to bring in Martha Raddatz, our Chief Global Affairs anchor, for more on that. Martha, after those Paris attacks 4 months ago, you spent time on the ground in this neighborhood in Molenbeek, where the terror cell was apparently able to continue despite the attacks, despite the increased focus by Belgian authorities.
They clearly have support from some people there in those neighborhoods where they were searching 24/7 for days and days and days, and that has supposedly continued for months. But as we've been reporting this morning, the terror network was apparently bigger than they thought in Belgium, so they had more people they should have been tracking and were not tracking. They will try to do that again now, but the idea that in this intense hunt, not only then, but now, after the arrest of Abdel Salam, and whether they got his cell phones, whether they got information from him, they learned some things, and they were still not able to stop this attack. Now, when you go to an airport and you have a big suitcase, people aren't going to stop you. And if you're outside the security, that is not suspicious. The same thing at a metro station. They're not going to stop you with a bag. If you look around, basically everyone looks suspicious at an airport and at a metro station. So these are very, very difficult things to look at. We've also got, George, as you know, the military campaign. I was just off an aircraft carrier. I was just at an Air Force base in the Persian Gulf and saw that military campaign, which indeed has stepped up. I was also there last year. They're carrying out many more strikes. They say the intelligence has improved. We also lost a U.S. Marine in Iraq this week in the fight against ISIS. So there is a presence on the ground, in the skies, going after these targets. But they talk about the root of the problem. The roots of ISIS are deep and wide, and that is the real problem.
That is the problem, Martha. And I want to bring in Matt Olson, the former head of the National Counterterrorism Center, as well. And Matt, what we may be seeing here is precisely a reaction to the kind of progress that the U.S. military says is being made in Syria, Iraq. You see a strategic lashing out in Europe.
I think that's exactly right, George. There has been progress on the ground in Iraq and Syria, but as these groups, as ISIS comes under that kind of pressure, the concern is that they will take steps to show their relevance and to carry out the kind of attack that we saw this morning in Brussels. I think, as Martha Raddatz said quite correctly, it's very difficult to stop one of these attacks at an airport or at a train station. These are very vulnerable targets. The key is getting good intelligence so that we can identify these plots before they're able to be carried out. Which
means right now, Richard Clarke, the pressure is going to be increased on Belgian authorities to try and get more information from the man they now have in custody, that attacker from Paris, Abdel Salam.
Well, they have him in custody, and they've been questioning him since Friday. They've undoubtedly got some information from him.
How about John
but
Carl?
if he knew these attacks were going to take place and didn't tell them, that's going to be a real problem. And the issue is again going to be raised. You heard Donald Trump saying it recently. Do you use torture? Torture doesn't work, George. Let's just get that straight, that all the experts in this business know that you can torture people. They'll give you information, but that information may not be true.
Okay, Richard, I'm here with our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, as well on the situation, what is going to happen here at home right now. The big concern among Homeland Security would be, are there copycats out there who will be inspired by this attack?
Well, we know for a fact that law enforcement has been tracking hundreds of individuals here who've been monitoring and communicating with ISIS via social media. That has been the big concern. The FBI in the last 18 months has arrested over 70 people, many of them who were trying to go to Syria initially, but in recent months they've been finding person after person who were, in some cases, planning to attack inside the United States, sort of similar to what we saw in San Bernardino. So that is the active threat. Copycat people here, radicalized online, who identify with ISIS.
They also want to prevent these lone wolves who might be inspired to act from creating networks of their own.
Exactly. If you think about what happened in France and Belgium now, the fact that this man was wanted for 4 months after Paris. They were looking for this man for 4 months, could not find him. That is unacceptable, the U.S. law enforcement officials tell me. It speaks to the terror network that supported him and the fact that European authorities have to step up their game.
Okay, thank you, Pierre. I want to go back to John Carl in Havana, Cuba right now. And John, we saw the president in that speech. He's still giving the speech to the Cuban people right now. But in that speech, a few sentences saying that we are thinking of the people of Belgium, saying we're going to do whatever we can to help the authorities get to the bottom of this. But the president seemed pretty determined to also strike a note of business as usual, to keep on going.
It was striking to me, George, how short his remarks were on this. As you mentioned, just a few sentences, strong words, called the attacks outrageous, called for unity, global unity in the fight against what he called the scourge of terrorism. But then he went right on with the rest of his speech. One other thing is he did speak this morning with the Prime Minister of Belgium and offered all assistance, anything necessary the United States could do in helping with the investigation going forward. But once again, a very measured response. And as you remember, we saw this back in November with the Paris attacks. The president gave an equally measured response and was criticized by many, especially his political opponents here in the United States. And then even further back with the Charlie Hebdo attacks, when he decided not to go to Paris and participate in that march. A very muted response, business as usual, promising to fight this scourge of terrorism.
And thank you, John. I want to go to John Cohen as well, former Homeland Security official. Talk more about, we just heard from Pierre Thomas, what the kinds of things Homeland Security is going to do. Talk more about the beefing up of the security presence at potential soft targets here in the United States in the wake of an attack like this as well.
Yeah, George, we're going to see an increased police presence at mass transit facilities, rail stations, airports, tourist sites, government buildings. And the idea is to have a visible presence, an armed visible presence, to dissuade people from carrying out attacks in this country. A little bit different threat here, aside from simply being concerned about copycats. We've also mainly seen active shooter type attacks in this country. So the types of defenses that are needed for that type of attack versus an explosive event is a little bit different.
Okay, John Cohen, thanks very much. We're going to take a quick break to let some stations go back to regular programming. For many of you, that will be Good Morning America.
This has been a special report from ABC News.